If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description. Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200 plus audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.
Chapter 61, Magic Stone Converter. To be clear, I purified the worm slime and sold that directly to the Blue Pharmacy and kept the normal drops for myself. My first experiment was with the crystal mantis carapaces and wings, and I was frankly unable to use them in the best way. Both of the drops were most useful in the creation of staves, but the problem was that to make the best staves you needed to mage developmental skill, which I obviously lacked. Crystal mantis drops, like the name implied, were made of crystal and as such while fantastic at passing mana through for magic, but were also brittle and thus not well suited for a melee weapon or armor. It was perhaps wasteful, but I could only either sell the stuff to the guild or turn it into windows. I of course did the latter option, since the end goal was to turn the church into a fortress made out of drop items. Naturally, this also included the windows, which were ironically the only part of the church I couldn't weaponize before now, since the glass didn't come from a living source. The drops being crystal meant that all I had to do was flatten them out into the shape of a pane of glass before transforming the color of the crystal to be perfectly clear. I debated about whether or not to put the Hestia divine emblem on the windows, but Hestia was vehemently against the idea, since that would be tacky according to her. She was the boss, so regular clear crystal windows it was. The other drops were thankfully so much better suited for my purpose, as they were all for weapons and armors. Wyvern scales were surprisingly the most interesting in how much energy they could hold before it became too much for them. A single scale could hold no less than 12 different properties, albeit weak one, before it cracked and broke apart. With that in mind, I fused 20 of the scales together into a single solid pink plate of material. I then repeated that process again until I had 2 plates of material roughly circular and exactly 2 feet across. Next, I refined these plates as much as I could regardless of energy, which was considerable, until they were insanely hard and sturdy. Once that was done, I carefully started imbuing the plates with a technique that I had high hopes for. The technique had exactly 2 functions and a whole mess of restrictions due to how easily it could go wrong. The functions were simply to extract mana from magic stones without destroying the stones, and to convert that mana to cursed energy to get sent back into the stone. I split this technique between both of the plates and prayed to Hestia that it worked. If I was successful, my supply of cursed stones would suddenly explode, which would open me up to many avenues of crafting. At the moment, it should be understood that I needed to wait for a magic stone to get empty before personally turning it into a cursed stone. I also couldn't go out and purchase the empty stones, as first they are crushed and turned into fertilizer for the fields of the city, and second, that would be suspicious as all shit if someone went out of their way to buy something universally accepted as near useless when empty. With this setup though, I could simply have Hestia feed magic stones into the R between the 2 plates and then wait to collect the finished product. Sure, this is basically having my goddess working for me, but she just lazes about most of the day anyways, so it's no big deal if she has something like this going on as well. Plus, it's not like this is super hard to do either, as it's place stone, remove stone, repeat, and profit. Plus, she could literally just have a pile of magic stones next to her that she could be sitting down and going through as she did it. All the really hard parts of the process get done by the 2 plates. Of course, that was all in theory before I actually created the setup. As you may have already guessed, however, nothing I do ever goes that smoothly as far as first attempts in crafting, so the setup became a detonation point instead. As in, it looked like it was going to work, but the moment the mana was extracted from the stone, it overpowered the cursed technique and exploded. I was smart, however, and was hiding behind a wooden shield the size of my body the moment I put the magic stone in its designated location. First attempt is a failure from Mana Riot. Perhaps if I slowed down the extraction rate drastically, the technique wouldn't get overpowered. I muttered as I pieced together the plates again. My next attempt also failed, followed by the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th attempts failing before I finally succeeded on the 8th. I'm going to need more than one of these things, aren't I? I muttered with a sigh as I calculated the amount of time it would take the setup to complete a single grade 2 orc magic stone. 2 hours. It was going to take 2 whole hours for the setup to fully extract all the mana safely, convert it to cursed energy, and then stuff it back into the empty stone. By my calculations, it would take even longer for higher grade and larger stones like the infant dragon or level 2 monster. This unfortunately was the best I could do at the moment, however, as I was getting dangerously close to overclocking the material limit of the scales. I made another 3 of the setups before moving on to the other drops that I found were worse at holding large amounts of energy but had their own affinities that could be used in future crafts. I directly turned the Almiraj hides into fluffy pillows that Hestia absolutely adored, since they were so soft and wonderfully white. The horns I kept to turn into handles and the lamia, hellhound, and wyvern drops I had left over I just experimented with in various ways until I was satisfied with my discoveries. Something curious happened the next day as Bell borrowed a book from the hostess that turned out to be a grimoire he used. I was suspicious that Seer was involved but she swore it really had nothing to do with her. The funny thing was that all the girls at the hostess were of the same mind about the matter. It sucks to be the person who forgot it. And easily moved past it. I was pretty sure that Bell's new magic bolt was the most broken spell ever as it was basically pure mana but it could take elemental properties if he added fire, water, earth, and wind to the incantation which was a super short bolt. Chapter 62, Bell's Time. So you mean to tell me that you ran into the dungeon and then proceeded to go ham with your new magic until you entered Mind Down? Not only that but you got found by these two out of literally everyone in the city. I asked Bell with a twitch of irritation. On the restored pew of the church Bell sat with a red embarrassed face while Tiona was grinning nearby and Ace was blank-faced watching this unfold curiously. Well, I got carried away, I guess. Bell said sheepishly. Don't be too hard on him Alex, it happens to most people when they first get magic. Seen a bunch of newbies in the familia do it to themselves though usually they don't do it in the dungeon. Tiona said cheerfully. I did it. Ace added trying to be helpful. While I appreciate you both trying to help Bell get out of trouble, the fact of the matter is that I specifically told him to do all his testing here where I could help him if things got out of hand and he didn't listen. The dungeon must have been feeling especially merciful today because otherwise only sheer dumb luck kept him alive. I said seriously and Bell shrank into himself a little more. Well, can't really argue there, gotta follow the captain's orders after all or things fall apart. Tiona said with a nod that Ace shared. Thank you for agreeing with me. Now what can I offer you as repayment for getting this knucklehead back safely? I said with a smile as I ruffled Bell's hair. I wasn't truly mad at him so much as disappointed that he ignored my advice so recklessly. Beyond all else though I was simply happy that no harm came to him because of this mistake. Gods know that a single different factor and I might never have seen him again as the dungeon ate him. We didn't do it for a reward but since you asked. Tiona said with a mischievous grin. I was fleeced plain and simple as the girls both picked out 3 of my figurines that they took with them as repayment. While not made from valuable materials each figurine was still highly prized if sold normally due to their collectability. Tiona took an armored knight figurine, ball gown wearing Amazon figurine and sleeping bear figurine. Ace took only dragon figurines though of different varieties as she took a western dragon, a flood dragon and a serpent-like winged dragon figurine. It was a steep price for merely lending such a small amount of help but I wasn't going to quibble about something like this. Bell however looked mortified watching so much money walk out the door. Well, skip in Tiona's case but you get the point. That alone made it all worth it in my opinion because I doubt he'd forget about this for a long time to come. Don't get me wrong though, I was still going to punish him for this and I had the perfect way to do it. Cardio, lots and lots of cardio, cardio until he dropped from exhaustion, which for an adventurer with his stats would take a while. As anyone who has ever actually done cardio will tell you, it's a miserable time. I also may or may not have forced Bell to wear a full set of weight property gear as well that added 100 extra pounds to him. Yet I'm sure he'd not be forgetting this anytime soon after he woke up. Moving on from that little event, things went smoothly for all of another week before in standard otherworld fashion shit hit the fan. Thankfully it wasn't my shit this time but Bell's, again. My familia apparently has a serious problem with minotaurs because Bell also ran into one that he also managed to kill somehow, which gave him his level up though at SS 1500 stats unlike my outrageous max limit 3000 ones. I suppose it doesn't really matter though as his new status sheet was a bit odd. Before. Name, Bell Cranel. Race, Human. Level 1. Strength 1500, SS. Endurance 1500, SS. Agility 1500, SS. Dexterity 1500, SS. Magic 1500, SS. Spells, Bolt Incantation, Bolt, summons a bolt of pure magic for attacking, can be augmented with one of the elements by saying it alongside the incantation. Example, Firebolt. Skills, Liar is freeze, reality is merely the lies we tell ourselves. Augments growth proportionate to the strength of one's feelings. After. Name, Bell Cranel. Race, Human. Level 2. Strength 0, I. Endurance 0, I. Agility 0, I. Dexterity 0, I. Magic 0, I. Spells, Bolt Incantation, Bolt, summons a bolt of pure magic for attacking, can be augmented with one of the elements by saying it alongside the incantation. Example, Firebolt. Skills, Liar is freeze, reality is merely the lies we tell ourselves. Augments growth proportionate to the strength of one's feelings. Argonaut, enduring all hardship in the name of success. Developmental skills, luck, I. This new skill is odd, it doesn't actually tell us what it does. Your developmental skill is not much better, but at least there are records of that, so we know roughly that it boosts drop rates and luck-based events. Hestia said with a frown. Well, it's not quite as messed up as my own status sheet when I first leveled up, but you are definitely just as abnormal. I mean, there's that frankly unfair magic of yours paired up with these two skills, one of which is certifiably cheating and the other that doesn't explain what it does but definitely sounds strong. A strange DS is hardly that odd in comparison. I said honestly while ruffling his hair. He hated when I did that. We went out to celebrate his level up at the hostess, and this time I made sure to bring much more money since that stuff was expensive. In a funny way, Belle had pushed Ace's record for leveling up to 2 down to 3rd place, as he was sitting at 3.5 months as an adventurer before leveling to her 6 months. She didn't really care, besides asking what our secret to getting so strong so fast was, but we were honest and explained that she couldn't replicate it. Loki though was all up in her feelings about it, though she made me very uncomfortable to be around as she ogled me openly. It came as little surprise then that her soul, which was massive and colorful, was also tainted with the sin of lust. I wasn't terribly surprised at the color of her soul, considering the mythology on Loki from Earth as a trickster god. Then again, not every myth was entirely trustworthy, since Hestia wasn't Artemis and Hephaestus's aunt in reality, so I took all my Earth myths with a grain of salt here. Don't get me wrong, they were more or less reliable, but some of the details were simply off here compared to the myths from Earth. Chapter 63, Investigation. Third-person POV. Ever since the day the dungeon city of Orario saw the myriad-colored smog of energy floating above it, something had changed. Those above level 4 felt it, like a sudden shift in the winds, but from a direction they were unfamiliar with. The top familiars of the city and the hidden darkness that lurked beneath the streets and around every corner sought answers, but it was to no avail, as no records of a similar situation existed. Tension rose in these groups as they felt something brewing and could only prepare for the worse. Nearly 2 months passed and nothing could be found, so Orario went back to operating as per usual, though did not forget the oddity of that day. A new piece of news started circulating at this point, however, of an up-and-coming familiar that had broken the famed Sword Princess's level 2 leveling speed not once but twice. The first time was something that created quite a buzz, especially when the one who leveled up was also already indirectly famous for creating the bone figures that had become a hit in the city. Despite this, it wasn't anything that most paid much heed to. That changed when the second member of the same familia, an adventurer of no renown, also broke the record set by Ace Wallenstein. This double feat of record-breaking caused many gods to demand an explanation from the goddess of these two adventurers, Hestia. They called foul play as the situation was unbelievable, and thus they thought the goddess had raised her familia members through forbidden means. An emergency meeting was called where the goddess Hestia had to prove her innocence. As the most trusted god for his neutrality in all regards, Hermes was assigned to look at the evidence and speak of the truth of this matter. That is where Alexander Drake came into play. First-person POV. This trial caught us all off guard, to say the least, as one moment we were celebrating Belle's level up and the next we were standing before a host of gods, all radiating a small amount of their divinity to pressure me and Belle. A god with smooth wheat-brown colored hair, wearing a feathered hat and traveling clothes, spoke up grandly from the center of this place, like reminded me of an old Roman theater. Today the divine host of Orario has gathered to investigate the unusual circumstances surrounding the goddess Hestia's 2 children's level ups. The god said with a flourish of his hands that seemed to keep his audience's rapt attention. He continued, I, Hermes, have been given the duty to interrogate these 2 mortals in front of you all to put this matter to rest once and for all, so without further ado let us get this investigation underway. Hermes said grandly before turning to us. Let's start with the captain of the familia, Alexander Drake, or better known perhaps as Black Mark. Hermes said with a gleam in his eyes that didn't look like a good thing. Ask away, I have nothing to fear since I have done nothing wrong. I said with a challenging smirk that clearly bothered the god as his eyes narrowed. He wasn't the only one either, as the gods in the bleacher-like seats began to scoff, look doubtful or even some angry after I spoke. It wasn't surprising really, as in my situation most mortals would be so nervous that they barely be able to stand, much less speak so boldly. The thing was though that I could literally see the souls of these gods, and that meant all their acting was pointless, as I could see their very essence. Gods were just people with a lot of power, and that's all. Well, if you are so confident, let's start off with some simple questions to establish a baseline. What is your name? Hermes asked sternly. Alexander Drake. I answered, never dropping my smirk. What is your gender? He asked. Male. I answered. Very good, now you need to tell a lie so we can make sure that you aren't able to deceive us. Hermes said sternly. Easy, we cheated to level up as fast as we did. I said with a cheeky grin, knowing that all their lie detecting abilities just went off at the same time. There was disbelief, anger, doubt, and all-around uproar with that simply statement from my lips. Hermes looked at me with what I could only amount to irritation at how easily I had just played him to throw this entire meeting into chaos. Oh, I knew exactly how this was going to go the moment he started doing the same thing they did with polygraph tests back on Earth. The two truths and a lie method to determine validity of an interrogation. What I did was simply throw the accusation of us cheating to level up so fast onto its head as my lie. If you are wondering why exactly I did this, it was simply because I had a gut feeling that if Hermes had his way he'd make this troublesome for me by asking things private or that I simply couldn't answer. To stop that, I flat out made it impossible to continue questioning me freely, as I had already covered the main topic, so it would be wrong to ask any unrelated questions, and he clearly knew it. Straight to the heart of the matter, is it then? Fine, Goddess Hestia, I would ask that you unlock Mr. Drake's foulness so that I may verify that there's been no foul play involved. Of course, I swear on my Arca Enum to you that any information best kept private shall remain so if there is indeed no issue. Hermes said to Hestia calmly but firmly. I looked at her and she nodded, so I took off my shirt, which elicited gasps from the gods seated as my full set of tattoos were revealed. Hermes himself looked at them with a critical eye. What is the purpose of these tattoos? He asked, unable to deny his curiosity. They are symbolic. I said honestly. He hummed in acknowledgement before looking at Hestia, who rather reluctantly unlocked my fauna, letting him read it. It was rather amusing to watch his eyes widen to the point of bulging and his jaw practically hit the floor. Seen enough yet? I asked impatiently, since I was standing here without a shirt and it was making me uncomfortable to get ogled by so many people like this. He regained his composure, but he no longer looked so hostile when gazing at me, but rather brightly instead. There was no foul play as far as his level up was concerned. Hermes proclaimed loudly, and all the gods here begrudgingly seemed to accept that answer. After that it was Bel's turn, and the god looked between the two of us with an odd expression but declared that we were innocent of the accusation levied against us. The emergency meeting was ended there, though quite a few gods and goddesses came to bother Hestia, Bel, and I to try and figure out what made us so special. Chapter 64, Vows and Charade. None of them even bothered to ask Hermes what he saw, as the god had sworn on his Arca Enum to keep it to himself, and that was no low promise. The closest equivalent to such an oath I knew of was a permanent binding vow using cursed energy. Binding vows were something I was avoiding heavily at the moment for the simple fact that they made me uncomfortable. See, the way they work was via three primary configurations: restriction, oath, and trade. Restriction type vows, as the name implied, put on a restriction to a person, and in exchange they gained heightened power for however long the restriction lasted. Permanent restrictions, or the harsher restrictions, were the more power you got from them, an equal balance of buffs and debuffs if you will. The second configuration of binding vows, oaths, were more one-sided in nature, as it was basically making a promise with actual penalties if you fail to keep it. These are typically used to verify truths or keep things private, but also could more or less turn whoever used it into indentured slaves until they fulfill the promise they made. Naturally, this type of vow also gives a boost in power to the one who used it, but it's negligible most of the time. Finally was the trade type binding vows that were more or less just an exchange of benefits between two or more parties, like a sale. The catch here was that weaseling out of your end of a deal in this regard was not an easy thing, and always ended badly for you if you did it. When a god swore upon their Arca Enum like Hermes did, it was almost the same as setting up an oath-type binding vow with serious consequences if they broke it. The only real difference besides the energy type used to accomplish it was that the god that made the oath got no boost for doing so, it was all downsides and no upsides besides reinforcing trust in them. Hermes worded his oath in just such a way that he would only be able to share what he found from reading our faunas if and only if he found something wrong, which he didn't. Obviously both Bel's and my faunas were insane, but all entirely possible within the normal rules of the fauna. This meant that asking Hermes about our private information was not even a real option unless Hermes felt that he got more than he risked by revealing the information. It must be a skill, right? Tell us what it is. Are you single? You can join my familia if you want to. Our children should delve together. Can I order a bone figure? All this and more as the gods and goddesses fervently surrounded our three-person familia after the investigation was over. It was fucking irritating me to no end, and I was getting more and more tempted to bust out my flames to get all these people to back the hell off. They all scattered however when a single soft, sensual almost but commanding voice spoke up. How uncouth, as gods should we not show more decorum in front of these mortals? The voice caused all the gods and goddesses to stiffen before parting to reveal the owner of it. A single goddess with long silver hair like silk that had perfect proportions with pale flawless skin and deep violet eyes that twinkled with an enchanting light. Her smooth beautiful face held a casual smile. Her outfit was a simple black dress that hugged her proportions enticingly but covered everything it was supposed to, though showed most of her left leg when she walked due to the open from mid-thigh to the bottom of it. I grinned when I saw her soul. However, a pleasure to make your acquaintance, miss, I said, knowing that she was likely stepping in to help us out. Freya, the pleasure is all mine, Mr. Drake. The bone figure that Otter purchased from Hestia is one of my most prized possessions, she said, still casually smiling. Oh no, it looks like she's charmed another one. A quiet murmur was spoken by a god somewhere, and many of the gods had a helpless expression after hearing it. I ignored that however, as it wasn't even remotely true. Yes, I remember that day quite well. Admittedly, I was rather concerned when she told me about it. Your familia doesn't have the best reputation, you understand, I said with a chuckle, but it was like a gun went off as all the gods and goddesses had horrified expressions, as it was an open secret that you don't badmouth Freya or her familia publicly. I of course knew this, but I also knew Freya, or rather I suppose I should say I knew Seer, her secret identity. The woman I knew wasn't opposed to criticism so long as you weren't being malicious about it, and at this moment I wasn't. I merely stated a fact that I doubted she didn't know. She sighed in a way that made her seem the victim. Most of those rumors are grossly exaggerated, I can assure you, though I appreciate your candor in this matter, she said, sounding sincere. No one else seemed to notice it, but Hestia had a confused look from next to me as she watched this interaction between Freya and myself. I could understand why too, as I was clearly not charmed like the other gods believed. In fact, I doubted that innate ability of all beauty goddesses would even work on me to begin with, and may instead just give me a boost in cursed energy. Lust, obsession, and greed to possess are all things that fall under sins, and as it happens I just so happen to have a skill that pretty much negates those things on me due to its nature. Hestia knew this too, which was why she was looking confused about the fact that I was acting like a polite person, which I definitely am not. I wasn't abrasive or anything like that, but I definitely didn't bother with troublesome stuff like manners. The answer to her unspoken question was that I was playing the part of a charmed individual, if one who wasn't reduced to a jabbering mess. The reason for this charade was to try and get these other gods not to get any funny ideas out of fear that Freya would strike back against them. So long as these gods and goddesses think Freya is interested in me or Belle, they would try and keep their distance. I may be wrong, but I was pretty sure that this was Freya's reason for stepping in to begin with. It's fine. An interesting little TID bit you should know is that bone figure was actually the very first I ever crafted. Those collectors would likely pay a high price to own such a thing, I said with a chuckle. Truly? In that case it's much more precious than I thought, and I'll definitely keep it for myself, she said with an interested look. Chapter 65, Meet and Greet. I shrugged. Up to you, just thought you'd like to know, I said with a smile. I do enjoy the knowledge, yes. Ah, but we really mustn't keep all these people here with our idle chatting. I shall take my leave now, but don't hesitate to approach me if you ever need anything, she said with a smile before leaving with a sultry sway of her hips. Like planned, the other gods and goddesses with any desire to poach Belle or I left quietly, while only those with intentions related to other matters and thus not having to fear Freya were left. A total of which numbered only 6. The first was Hephaestus to discuss our coin deal that was still in the works and being finalized. I couldn't help but find it amusing how confused she was when she discovered that I wasn't in fact charmed by Freya. She only discovered this because she specifically went out of her way to look for it, likely out of self-interest. Like I said, I wasn't dense enough to miss the signs of her trying to get my affections, but that didn't mean I couldn't ignore them. Cruel perhaps, but she was immortal and I very much was quite limited in time, so she while could afford to have distractions like romance, I couldn't. Moving on, the second god was Ogun, who was smiling like he had won a bet as he said proudly that he had insisted that I was innocent of this accusation. I knew that he had indeed tried standing up for me, but without undeniable proof none of the other gods believed him. There was nothing for it, unfortunately, as that was just how gods were in general about stuff they had their minds set on. Stubbornness was all too commonplace amongst their number, but considering while they were in heaven they were denied almost nothing, it wasn't so hard to understand why. Anyways, Ogun merely came to congratulate us on the achievements as well as warn us to stay away from the Freya familia. The third was a goddess with massive boobs and honey-colored hair that was the definition of a MILF, Demeter. She was mature looking with a body that left you staring even if you didn't intend to. Era, Mr. Drake, if you continue looking at me like that I'll blush. The goddess teased with a giggle after catching me staring. I coughed awkwardly while looking away, embarrassed when Hestia glared at me. I couldn't help it, damn it, I was a perfect heterosexual male, so there was no way in hell I wasn't going to take an eyeful of such a bountiful harvest. Anyways, Demeter just wanted to catch up with Hestia since they hadn't seen each other since they were in heaven, but the goddess also made it known that she wasn't worried about the result of this investigation at all. The fourth god was a light brown-skinned man with a clean white robe and straight-bound beard on his chin and nowhere else. I have been following your work with the bone figures for quite some time and must admit that I am a big fan. The lifelike imagery and imaginative creatures are always a pleasure to see. Ah, where are my manners? I am the god Te, god of artists. The god said with an eagerly held out hand. I shook the hand. Alexander Drake, an artist of sorts, I guess. I said awkwardly. I honestly never considered what I did with the bone figurines to be art, but when a literal god of art is a fan of your work, saying otherwise kinda loses any purpose. I wonder if I might ask for a custom piece for my personal collection? I am more than willing to pay handsomely, of course. Te asked eagerly. Depends on what you want, as I don't make erotic pieces, but otherwise it shouldn't be any issue. I said honestly. I can respect not wanting to cross such a line in case you accidentally depict a person who truly exists. But I was more interested in one of the monster figures, the one with the body of a lioness and the upper torso of a beautiful woman. The Sphinx. Though what I want is a figure made life-sized if possible. As I said, money will be no issue at all. He said with a smile. That particular creature is quite large, are you sure you want one of those made life-size? I asked, astonished by the request. Sure, I could do it, but it would be a challenge even for me, as a sphinx was about the size of an infant dragon after all, maybe a bit bigger. Oh, absolutely. I was hoping to use it as the centerpiece for my familius manor, in fact. He said eagerly. I don't mind, but you'll need to come to our familius home to discuss the details of this commission. I said honestly, and he agreed without hesitation. The fifth was a goddess with dark hair and pale skin, not from being fair but because it was untouched by the sun. Her eyes were black and shiny like obsidian glass that peered at you calmly. What bothered me, however, was her soul that looked suspiciously like my own in that it was nothing but purest black. Nix, Hestia breathed out warily. Hestia, so very good to see you away from that stuffy bright flame in heaven. And I must say that I am surprised to see that you have a child like this in your familia. Such a deep resonance to my arca enum he has. Why, I almost want to snatch him up for myself. The goddess said with a predatory smile as she spoke that gave me goosebumps. He's my child and don't you forget it. Hestia said, standing between us defensively. Nix just smiled wider before walking past us and whispering in my ear as she went, I'll be watching your progress with bated breath, little soul. She spoke sensually and I stiffened. I wanted really fucking hard not to take that first meeting to heart, but something about that goddess bothered me on a deeply primal level and I wasn't sure why. Anyways, the final god left to speak with us was no other than the god that had personally verified our innocence himself, Hermes. No hard feelings, I hope? I was simply doing my job after all. He said with a friendly smile. In that case, why are you still here? Surely you don't want to talk about what you saw, after all, what's it got to do with you at this point? I asked, stopping the god in his tracks. Chapter 66, Annoying Matters. I suppose you aren't entirely wrong, but there is no way I could ever not be interested in such wondrous faunas. Why, your fauna for example, so very many dark aspects, cursed energy, hell's forge, hellfire, blessing of black, soul gaze, your race. If I didn't know any better I'd swear you were almost a true demon. The god said with a victorious grin. No need to threaten me, god, you have plenty of weaknesses I can grasp as well. Your precious familia for example. It would only take me a mere moment, the lightest touch and 2 words to disfigure them, transform them into monsters to be slaughtered on sight. Such a tragedy it would be. I sent back, causing his face to darken. Oh yes, Hermes was a manipulative bastard without a doubt, but he also definitely knew that I wasn't merely bluffing at this point. One look at my status and the sort of harm I could cause if properly incentivized was crystal clear. The best part is that it would be almost impossible to stop me if I truly followed through with this set of actions unless he was willing to permanently leave Orario, and he knew this. Of course, I believe it best if we try to play nice, so you keep what you should to yourself and keep your manipulating hands away from us and we'll get along just fine. I added while a smile that didn't extend to my eyes. He sighed, fine, I know when to gracefully bow out and I am the one at a disadvantage this time. Perhaps however now that we've gotten that bit of unpleasantness out of the way we can discuss future cooperation. He said with a smile, flipping the mood 180. Gonna be honest here, that's up to her. You want something made, talk to her. Oh right, I should add that teaming up in the dungeon is off the table since my flames don't play well with others. Too much risk of getting my partners caught up as collateral damage when I go all out. I said with a casual shrug without getting thrown off by his sudden switch in mood at all. That is unfortunate to hear, but not a deal breaker if your creations live up to your fauna. So Hestia, dearest Hestia, how's about we have a chat about how we can both make a vast amount of Valis? The god said with a wide smile. It was extremely amusing to watch my goddess go from basically sitting back and letting me handle everything to having to deal with an eager Hermes. I did have to warn him a few times when I saw his eyes wander to places they shouldn't during the conversation, but otherwise there wasn't anything weird about the conversation. There was however a very annoying few days after this investigation that we had to deal with. First and foremost was that we were the talk of the city for a few days before the gods got bored and turned their attention elsewhere. What that meant was a lot of attention from jealous, ill-meaning, fans or fame-seeking people when we were in public. The jealous ones were all spite and no bite. The ill-meaning ones tended to have sinful souls that I gratefully reaped for stats in secret, and if they didn't, tended to vanish in the dungeon after following me in. I felt nothing when I killed these people, nor when I left them crippled in front of monsters to get killed that ways, since that was a loophole in my skill. The fans came in 3 flavors of increasingly annoying levels. The first was the Amazons that wanted to mate with Belle and I for our talents. Mostly this involved a lot of seduction attempts, to some even bluntly asking to fuck. Belle turned into a tomato more often than not in the face of these girls, which was hilarious to watch. I myself just rejected their advances casually since I didn't want to waste time like that. The second type was the newbies to Orario who all hoped to be the next us and shoot to fame by leveling up at rocket speeds. These fans were unfortunately not likely to ever accomplish that if my soul gaze was to be trusted. I saw very few souls that shone quite as bright as Belle's, and mine did, and according to Seer/Freya that was how she knew how talented someone was. I should probably mention that I was taking lessons on how to best use my soul gaze from her as well, and in the process that my own version was slightly different than hers. For example, I could see the sins of staining a soul, but she instead could see the emotions of the soul when she looked at it instead, but not the sins. Hers gave her a way to better manipulate people and understand what they were thinking at any given time thanks to this difference, while mine allowed me to more or less judge someone's past actions and make predictions on their future actions as a result. It was fascinating how similar yet different the same ability worked in 2 different people. Anyways, the third type was the apprentice type. Adventurers that sought Belle, Hestia, or myself out to try and learn under us or join our familia for that reason. They were by far the most annoying to deal with, as they had a problem taking no for an answer. You know, the sort of people that think that if they learn from clearly talented or successful people that they themselves will become talented, irritating buggers the lot of them. Finally came the fame seekers, adventurers that came to challenge Belle or myself to combat, to prove, try and use us as stepping stones by publicly defeating us. More often than not we ended up just rejecting their challenge and the matter ended there, but for the few who tried to insult us or even worse our familia to pressure us, we curb stomped them. The trick was that only those who just leveled up to level 2 or those at level 1 could use this method, and good fucking luck finding anyone else at that developmental stage as monstrous as us. Hell, I ended up even putting mid-level 2s to the dirt with sheer physical stats alone, much less beginner level 2s like me. I didn't kill them BTW. Chapter 67, Commission Work. Other than that, there wasn't much worth mentioning after the investigation was over, besides perhaps that my bone figurines had started going for a higher price as the fame made people want them more, but the supply was less than the demand. I specifically told Hestia not to sell more of them even if we had the supply to meet the demand, because this way the price will stay a nice amount while also being fairly consistent. This may be a bit greedy, but it should be remembered that these figurines didn't serve any practical purpose and were purely decoration. No one had to buy the things or risk some terrible fate. It was purely a luxury item, so naturally I would treat it as such and let the customers set the price. As a result, it was valuable because people said it was valuable, like diamonds or other precious gemstones. The funny part was that some people had tried to copy my bone figurines but failed every single time, as they always had flaws and details that became obvious as time went on. My favorite example was this one alchemist guy that melted down bones with a special potion before hardening them again in molds. Once the bones hardened again from the potion wearing off, the result was indeed a detailed figurine, but there were always these small cracks or discolorations that he couldn't get rid of. Honestly, I applauded the man's ingenuity and even had a couple of his figurines myself, as even while imperfect they reminded me that this world was full of impressive people. One of the biggest issues that these fakes had, however, was that they failed to mineralize the bones, so the figurines would rapidly decay when left exposed to the elements, unlike my own. My figurines were all entirely mineralized to prevent this exact issue and thus were more stone than bone, you could say, but no one else has managed to replicate this yet. About a week after the investigation ended, Ta came to visit the church bright and early, eager to work out his commission's details. As I said previously, I would like a life-sized Sphinx statuette made. Please feel free to request anything you feel necessary to make this a reality. Money will be no issue at all, he said with a wide smile. Well, first let's get the material composition out of the way. Now I have a few options that you may choose from as per your own aesthetics and preference. Naturally, the detail of the finished product will be the same regardless of the material, but this way I can guarantee satisfaction. The materials and solidity are denoted by price, so you can even choose an option that is pleasing as well, I said seriously as I handed over the list. Oh my! Such fine quality paper, do you by chance make this as well, and if so, would you be willing to sell some? The god asked while rubbing my self-made paper between his thumb and forefingers appreciatively. I do indeed make the paper, and admittedly I hadn't thought of selling it until you asked, but I see no reason why I couldn't, I said honestly. Wonderful, wonderful, now let me take a look at this material list of yours, Ta said with a happy smile. I waited for a few moments while the god scrutinized the list seriously. It wasn't a particularly long list, as effectively there were roughly 6 options: normal wood, normal bone, dungeon wood, monster bones, dungeon stone and dungeon crystal. Naturally, the stuff from the dungeon and monsters was more expensive depending on the difficulty of acquisition. I must admit you have me in a bit of a bind, as while I wholeheartedly agree with the prices you have set for these material, I am torn between each of them, as I can imagine they would each have their own charm, the god said with a sad smile. I nodded in understanding. I anticipated this issue and went ahead and created a few sample pieces out of each material to help if you'd like to peruse them, I offered casually with a grin. Such preparedness is worthy of praise, please do show me what you have, the god said excitedly. I got up and went down below to retrieve these test pieces I made, since I figured that since I was treating these figurines like a luxury product, I may as well go all out with it. These 6 figurines were of the same creature, in the exact same position and in the same level of detail as well. Ta had bright eyes as he looked at each of these pieces with a skilled appraiser's gaze. Marvelous, absolutely phenomenal. I believe I have my choice made after feasting my eyes on these beauties. I would like to choose the dungeon crystal option. The way the light seems to resonate and cause this figurine to shine would no doubt prove positively stunning in my familiar's manner. Yes, I simply must have it, the god said with an almost fanatical expression. Why am I not surprised that the god of art is obsessed with the stuff? I thought with a mental chuckle. Welp, this is where my part of this process ends, and the rest is between you and my goddess here, I said casually as I pointed to Hestia as I got up. Honestly speaking, Ta was surprisingly agreeable to whatever Hestia said as they worked out the size, price, and payment method that was going to be used. Part of the deal, of course, was that Ta would have to provide the materials I would be working with, but Hestia assured him that I didn't need a single massive chunk of crystal, and many smaller ones were fine so long as together it all added up to the right amount. The final price of this single work of mine came out to a whopping 4 million valis, which was a frankly absurd amount of money for what was a decorative statue in the end, but hey, that's how it is with luxury goods. Half of the payment came up front, and with Hestia's permission I used it in our saved funds to purchase the surrounding land by the church, so I have the room I would need to privately work on such a massive statue, my own little workshop if you'd like. Chapter 68, Finger Licking Good. To be clear, it was just the 6 plots of land on either side of the church that added about 30 yards of land to either side of the church to our possessed land. That may seem like a lot, but in truth that was pretty average for decently sized familiars. Even worse was that until I took the time to tear everything down, that land would look like a bunch of abandoned buildings still. Destruction was way easier than creation though, so all I had to do to fix this issue was unleash my flames and watch that shit burn until nothing was left. If you are wondering why I didn't reuse the wood from the buildings, it was simply because I didn't feel like it. Hestia might have preferred the church's original shape and design, and I maintained it as a result, but this land was mine and I wanted to get creative with it. That means it was time for me to go all evil supervillain and make an underground lair. Well, okay, so half and half really, but the point still stands. I wasn't going to use wood for this project though, as I wanted to make my lair a god's damn nightmare to breach. To accomplish this, I grabbed a massive tarp and headed to the dungeon to slaughter me some orcs. My plan was simple really, I was going to refine the thing's entire skeletons and use their bones to build my base. Fucking metal as hell, right? Obviously this was going to take more than one trip, but I was more than happy to put in the legwork. Killing the orcs was also easy as shit, as I just ran up to them and used my cursed technique to seal their eyes, ears, noses and mouths before patiently waiting for them to suffocate to death. Naturally, I also spent some time hunting down any metal I could find on floors 10 through 12 with my metal detecting compass. I got some really odd looks when I first left the dungeon with a massive makeshift sack of clattering bones on my back, but no one stopped me, and after repeating this process for a week the guards had even given me a new nickname, Bone Collector, which was still better than the one the gods gave me in my opinion. Still, after a week of slaughtering orcs and other large type monsters and dragging their entire skeletons back to the church, I had enough to make the above ground portion of my lair. Cheeky ass I am, I even set up a big cloth curtain to stop anyone from seeing me create the building. I had the bones all piled up like small mound of corpses in place when I got started by placing my hands onto side of the pile. Hell's Forge. I spoke and the black and blue curse energy began to pour across the entire pile like it was soaked in gas before hit with a lit match. If anyone could see what was going on, they'd be astonished to see all the bones melting into a pond of discolored liquid before that liquid turned into a huge perfectly flat rectangle. I took a break to restore my cursed energy because this was obviously not a energy cheap process. This meant I downed potions like they were water on a hot day. Still, my next move was to raise the walls from this bone foundation, which I did by causing the bone to rise on the sides to my chosen height roughly before fixing the shape manually. I was a bit miffed to discover that I didn't have enough bone to create the roof and had to make a couple more trips to the dungeon to collect the stuff. By this point the crystal for Ta's commission was starting to show up in a bunch of chunks the size of a person. I just stored them in my unfinished building while I worked on completing it. Finally though, after a week and a half of effort, I had a big ass hollow rectangle of monster bone set up, which left me with the fun part of this project, decoration. I transformed the walls on the outside into a false appearance of a stone brick construction, seams with uneven mortar included. Then I literally raised the roof into long Chinese style tile design that looked marvelous from the outside but was totally transparent on the inside. The final touch, I used the metal I had collected to create an alloyed metal door to seal the place shut when I wasn't here. It was a simple thing that sat on internal hinges that had a single handle and cursed tool lock of my own design. I was quite proud of my lock too, as I imbued it with a cursed technique to recognize my fingerprint, so I just needed to stick my thumb in the socket to unlock the door. The best part was that I added a cannibal mechanism to the lock, so if anyone not registered tried it, they'd lose that digit. The only real security issue left was the air vents I had to keep me from suffocating in here as I worked. Lighting was easy, as I just made some cursed tools that produced light, and that was that. It looks suspiciously normal for you, Hestia said with a wary look as I showed off my new building. I clutched my chest over my heart dramatically. I'm offended that you'd think so little of me. All the fun stuff is just well hidden, I said with a grin. I knew it. Alright, so what insane stuff have you casually added to this place then? She asked curiously. Well, the door eats fingers, then the walls have inbuilt lighting sources, and finally the roof is actually transparent on the inside, I said casually. The door eats fingers? She exclaimed in horror. I smiled proudly. Hell yeah, it does. Slaps door, this baby can eat so many fingers, I said with a laugh at the look she gives me, like I had gone off the deep end. Chill, it's an anti-theft measure, so unless someone without permission tries to get in, you've got nothing to worry about. I reassured her that I wasn't that mad quite yet. Might get there in the future, but not at the moment, so everything's fine and nobody needed to start worrying about it for the time being. Why would you even make something like that? She asked with a confused look. Ah well, most locks can be picked, but this lock will eat your fingers if you try, so like it's way better, right? I asked with a wide smile at my impeccable logic. Chapter 69, Skills. Why are you like this? Hestia asked with a long-suffering sigh. What, I'm right, aren't I? I insisted. Well, yes. But still. She said angrily. See, it's fine then, and besides, you have to admit that it would be kind of funny to hear about a bunch of thieves missing fingers, I said with a chuckle. With that, my little construction project came to a close for the moment, and I could finally throw myself into the middle floors before the monster Rex to raise my stats. Obviously I got a good deal of smoke from killing the orcs to make my new workshop, but as it was from level 1 monsters, the amount was not optimal. While I was busy with all this, Bell was dealing with his own issues in the form of his new porter, Lilyruka Arde. She was a feisty Palom girl that had been tagging along with Belle as a porter for a while now, but her familia was starting to cause problems for Belle due to its nature. She was a member of the Soma familia, and despite Soma wine being the most expensive and popular in the city, the familia environment itself was a rotten place. For starters, the initiation into the familia involved a newbie being given a single shot of true wine brewed by the god himself. The problem came in the form of that stuff being hyper-addictive and thus sent the person who drank it into a frenzy for more and thus indenturing them to the familia by debt. Lily's parents had effectively sold her into the familia to pay for some of their debt and she had her own to pay, and well, the familia didn't exactly want its members to be debt-free since that means less profit for them. You get how this story is going. One thing led to another and now Lily's problems had become Belle's because he's just the nicest person ever. I had bluntly told Belle that he could just get Soma to release her from the familia to fix this whole thing, but the issue was getting to the god as he was weaseled away deep in his familia manner. I suppose that I should also clarify that Soma wasn't the reason for his familia being such a bad place. See, the god used to be a bright and happy person before he came down from heaven. He became disillusioned however when he discovered that mortals that drank his wine lost themselves to it and thus couldn't enjoy it as he intended. From then on he ceased to care about all else beyond creating the divine wine endlessly. His familia's captain hijacked the familia and from there turned it into the toxic place it is today because Soma lacked the will to intervene or stop it. In a way I pitied the god as he had effectively lost the will to live and was merely existing at this point. Belle's not the most outside-the-box thinker though, and instead of just having Hestia force her way in, because nobody is stupid enough to attack a god and thus stop her, he is effectively waging a shadow war on them until they are forced to consider releasing Lily. Now I could step up as the captain of the familia to solve this issue real easy like, but this was his mistake to learn from, and unless the Soma familia goes too far with it I'll keep it hands off. Why do I have to deal with you people when Belle's the one causing trouble? I asked with a sigh when 3 Soma members ambushed me in the dungeon. Nothing personal, but you gotta take the fall as his captain. One of the dudes said with a slimy smile. Thankfully your souls are all sinful or this might get annoying. Burn away for your transgressions and try to be better people in your next life, okay? I said calmly before releasing a wave of flame at them. The adventurers screamed as the flames consumed them and I yawned in boredom while casually watching their souls get purged. As I had found out, the boost in stats I got from killing each sinful soul was actually terrible at barely 3 or 4 per kill. In addition, it turns out my apathy towards murder was in fact a side effect of my skill. I know this because even thinking about killing an innocent soul makes me feel sick. Yay for morally questionable mind-altering skills. Sarcasm aside, this at least let me understand how the fauna worked a bit better when it comes to skills and magics. Skills weren't just one-off buffs that showed up and that was that, but rather were very literal representations of you in some way. My skills minus soul gaze were each a sort of amplified representation of my own will, fears, hopes and experiences. Vessel of Sin was from my fear that I'd stop being me and would turn into a monster as I grew stronger. The skill now basically turned me into a technically righteous existence as a result. That unfortunately meant that Belle was practically doom-driven due to his 2 skills. Lyris Freeze was all about growing based on the strength of his emotions. Argonaut on the other hand was apparently all about enduring suffering to achieve success. It was a match made in hell if I ever saw one. Belle had literally caused himself to be built for hardship since these things on a fauna were very much permanent. He could get Hestia to strip his fauna from him, but if any god gave him another, those skills would be there waiting. They were a part of his very existence now, for better or worse, and every other adventurer with a skill was in the same boat. Heavy thoughts aside, I delved until I started getting swarmed by level 2 monsters on the 16th floor. Sidestep, smash, backstep, slash. I moved in a dance of aggression and death within the minotaurs, never stopping for more than a moment after each swing of my weapon. Blood fell on the stone floor from me as well as my foes. Slick. A rough stone blade draws across my back, cutting it open shallowly, but with a small flex of my will the cut seals shut almost immediately. I had gotten quite good at flesh mending with my technique in battle, but I had hard limits. One such limit was that anything deeper than a millimeter took too long and too much focus to deal with. Another was that I couldn't heal burns or disfigurement during a fight either. Finally was that anything I mended like this leaves a scar on me permanently. I could of course remove the scars later with my technique if I wished, but I preferred to keep them as a reminder of my flaws that I needed to correct. Chapter 70, Learning Through Pain. For example, using this method I discovered that I tended to leave my back exposed quite often, and as a result had been slowly correcting that flaw through trial and error. For anyone else this method of patching flaws would be suicidal, as the injuries would start adding up until they'd drop from blood loss. In my case, however, I sealed the shallow wounds almost before they had a chance to bleed and adjusted my movements and focus to correct the discovered flaw. Despite this, however, I wasn't feeling challenged at all fighting these level 2 monsters. It was all because of my flames. No matter how much pressure these level 2 monsters put on me with their numbers, I knew that if it ever became too much, I had something I could use to trivialize the fight. It would be oh so easy to just send the flames out and sit back while they did all the work because of their nature. I knew however that this was a flaw in and of itself, as if I relied on my flames to handle all my issues, what would happen when I couldn't for whatever reason? The answer was simple and clear as day: I'd die. If I relied on my flames to handle all my enemies, then I'd just be leaving myself vulnerable in the case they didn't work. Understanding this, I relegated my flames to a last resort, or something I used when I didn't want to waste time fighting something or someone. This caused me no small amount of suffering, but that was where the fauna and cursed energy excelled the most, so my gains outweighed the cost. Perhaps my stats weren't growing rapidly, but my skill in combat was improving by leaps and bounds. I had even started being able to react to the way the monsters moved to attack and counter before they finished, or even interrupt them sometimes. There were patterns in how they moved, and after fully immersing myself in the battles, I started to recognize these patterns and react preemptively. It was pretty clear to me, however, that no level 2 should attempt to learn this trick of mine. The speed between the action of the monster, your brain recognizing what's happening and you moving to react to that recognition, was so tight that it created an ungodly amount of fucking strain on me. It was an advanced concept that probably only became really viable at higher levels, maybe 4 or beyond. Despite figuring this out, I still tried to master this new way of fighting, because I also knew that the fauna tended to reward effort with the harder something was, the better the reward for putting in the effort. So while this way of fighting was more suited for a higher level adventurer, it was still possible to pull off at my level in exchange for a sharp increase in difficulty. Are you sure that you need to go so far? Hestia asked worriedly when I came home once again covered in my own blood, with more new scars adorning my skin. Believe me, I wish I didn't, but if I am to grow the fastest only by going to such lengths, is it possible? I said, feeling mentally drained. And what about these scars? Why do you insist on keeping them when all they do is remind you of pain? She asked unhappily while tracing my newest scars with her fingertip. I'll remove them when I remove the flaw in my combat style that created them in the first place. Think of them like progress markers rather than reminders of pain. Each one I take away means I come just that little bit closer to my goal. And when the day eventually comes that my skin holds no scars, you'll know all this pain and effort was worth it. I said with a smile as I imagined that future. I worry, you know, that you'll go too far and never come back. That one day you'll lose something you can't just fix with that power of yours. She said softly, and I just pat her on the top of the head. I'm harder to kill than a cockroach, so don't you worry your pretty little head about it. I might come home a little worse for wear, but make no mistake, I will always come home, I said confidently. After that short but heartfelt chat, it was time to work on my commission that was taking a while due to how energy intensive it was. I had already fused all the crystal together and removed all the impurity from it, leaving it as pure shiny crystal. I activated my technique and began to shape this mass of crystal into a very vague lioness body, if the lioness was laying down. The neck and chest area, however, was left raw and unformed, since those were going to be turned into the woman's torso. Despite this, however, I was burning through cursed energy at an alarming rate, simply due to the sheer size of the material and how much it was resisting transformation. Yes, my technique could be resisted, though if I paid enough energy I could overcome that resistance. At least that was the case for non-alive things like metals and crystals such as this. Transforming a living material like a monster's anatomy cost an excessive amount of cursed energy, as their resistance was way more intense, and in level 2 monsters I even risked mine 0 from the sheer amount of resistance I felt. Thanks to this, I was able to understand, or at least theorize, how my technique would improve as I grew stronger. Right now my techniques was barely strong enough to work on dead level 4 materials or alive level 2 materials, and by growing stronger this limit would also increase. In theory my technique might even be able to overcome the dungeon's resistance by the time I hit level 7 or 8. Anyway, this dungeon crystal was a dead material at around level 2 or 3, judging from the resistance I felt from it, which meant I spent a very large amount of energy just shaping the general form of the crystal statue. Ta was already aware that this was not a project that could be done in a short amount of time, and was fine waiting a month or so for me to finish it. I had already decided that I wouldn't update my fauna again until I finished this statue, or something happened that forced me to need a power-up for some reason. The reason for this was simply that only at that point would I see any decent growth in my stats. There was just something about my numbers jumping forward that was highly satisfying. Chapter 71, Routine. Thanks to this I started getting into a routine over the next month of waking up early, stopping by the hostess, delving to floor 15 or 16, spending a good 6 or 7 hours getting knocked around and killing any and all monsters that want to come at me. Then I'd turn in the excess materials or stones I had to the guild to keep up appearances, head over to the hostess again to eat dinner, head to the blue pharmacy to restock on potions and turn in my empty vials, and finally head back to the church to spend the rest of the night working on the statue until bedtime. It was a very rinse and repeat process, but that was sort of the way this worked for most adventurers in truth. Contrary to what it may seem, this life was actually very simple most days and rarely worth mentioning. Belle was having a less simple time of things over the last month however, and I even had to step in at one point because things were escalating when they really didn't need to. As it turned out, those people from the Soma familia that fucked around and found out kicked the proverbial hornet's nest when they went missing. Aggression between our familia started blooming, but the Soma familia couldn't declare a war game even if they really wanted to. Reason being, Soma didn't give enough of a shit anymore to actually declare one. The god was never seen in Dinatus meetings and was for the most part removed from this situation entirely. His whole familia was basically acting solely under the orders of his captain, and a mortal could only do so much based on the laws of this world. Hestia however wasn't the sort of person to put forth a war game unless the other side was a really big issue, and the Soma familia was not. They were rich sure, but they weren't strong by any means, with most of their members being level 2 and the captain himself only being a low level 3 min leveler. For reference, a min leveler is someone who gets a single stat to the minimum needed to level up, B rank, before they level up. After reaching level 3, the guy pretty much stopped adventuring and focused on lording over the Soma familia, and as such was only at the start of level 3. Even worse was that the guy had this habit of making anyone getting close to level 3 in the familia vanish to protect his spot as top dog. Yeah, real nasty piece of work, that one, but hardly a threat to even Belle, so I left the matter alone until the guy started hiring mercenary type adventurers to come after Belle. Don't get me wrong, it was the right move on the guy's part once he figured out no one in his familia could handle Belle or me. That said, the Soma familia's wealth was a very dangerous factor when applied to mercenary type adventurers. The wine they sold went for hundreds of thousands to up to a couple million valis a gallon jar depending on quality, and they had been selling hundreds of jars a month for years now. Naturally, this meant that the amount of money they can throw at mercenaries allows them to hire the dangerously powerful ones sitting at level 4 and 5 without sweating. So far the Soma captain had only had level 3s harassing Belle, but the precedent was there for him to get someone higher involved, and so I stepped in. My solution was simply to have Hestia march into the Soma familia's headquarters with Lily and Belle in tow before forcing Soma to settle this matter personally. This was where things took a turn for the worst as far as the captain of the familia went, as Soma gave the Palam girl a test. She had to drink a cup of undiluted divine wine, and while under its effects choose to forsake more wine to join our familia. The captain thought she'd fail and choose more wine, but to his horror the girl chose to leave the Soma familia to join ours. The reason this was to his horror was because this single seemingly simple act of not losing herself to the wine woke the wine god from his stupor. He regained his spark of passion and all but begged Lily to stay, as he finally found a mortal who could enjoy his wine without losing themselves. She ended up joining us anyways, while the god stripped the captain of his fauna for his transgressions before taking control of the familia again. And that, as they say, was that as far as that whole fiasco was concerned, and we even got allied to the Soma familia as a bonus. Beyond that, it was business as usual in the Hestia familia, with Belle and I both delving most days, and if not working on improving some other facet of our abilities. In my case, creating this statue was proving to be a worthy challenge in and of itself, as I needed to be hyper-aware of each and every minute detail to deliver my standard quality for my creations. I'm talking fur density, fur patterning, fur texture, fur length, skin texturing, veins, arteries, capillaries, muscle definition, cloth texture, realism, expression, the whole shebang. I went all out on this statue, and towards the end of the month you could tell, as if it wasn't obviously made of crystal, the statue looked moments away from standing up and walking around. I thought about shading the entire thing in the colors the creature would actually have, but I decided against it due to the fact that it would ruin the natural beauty of the crystal. Finally, a scant 3 days before the end of the month, I completed the statue and finally allowed Hestia, Belle, and Lily to take in its radiant splendor. As I discovered over the last month, I really didn't like people seeing my unfinished work and had been keeping everyone at bay until it was done. "It's so pretty," Hestia said with big bright eyes when she finally saw my creation. "Lily thinks you might have gone overboard," the small Palam girl said in shock as she examined the statue in closer detail. "Maybe we can have one for our familia too. How about a minotaur, since we both used one to level up?" Belle suggested excitedly. Vetoed. Nope. Absolutely not. I have been getting knocked around by those stakes for the past month, and I'll eat my shoes before creating a life-sized statue of one that'll stick around for longer than a day or two. I shot down that idea immediately. Chapter 72, Art. That reminds me, now that you've completed this statue, are you going to update your fauna now? Hestia asked curiously. I actually have one last thing to do before I do that, and if it works I'll have a nice surprise waiting when I update, I said with a grin. Something tells me I don't want to know what you have planned, so I'm not gonna ask, she said dryly. Your loss, I guess, now who wants to go with me to find Ta tomorrow? I asked with a smile. Nobody wanted to come, much to my disappointment, so I could only shrug and lock up for the night. The next morning I woke up, pried my goddess off me and headed to the bathroom to get dressed. I wasn't going to be delving today though, as I needed to have to come collect his statue and pay for it. I also had other plans that hopefully panned out, as it would prove very useful later when the size of the monster rexes and floors in the dungeon start getting very large. I'll explain more on that later when I get to working on it. Leaving the church, I headed over to the spot I knew that I'd be more than likely to find the art god in, the artist hut. A not so accurate name, as it was by no means a hut but rather a large gallery that was collectively run by Te, Bragi, and Calliope, who were all gods with a domain related to either creativity or art in some form. It was a huge marble building that they used to show off any art they found in the city that caught their eyes. It also was open to the public for a small fee of 300 valis, and after being open for a few years had paid for itself practically and was all profit after that. I paid the fee to enter the place and was not surprised to find that there was a small area that had no less than 20 of my figurines set behind a glass display case. My work was not the only art here though, far from it in fact, as there were paintings, sheets of music and even weapons and armor that were decorative in nature rather than functional. I found Ta in the area with the sheet music humming a tune that I was fairly certain was the music on the sheet, with a smile. "Good morning," I said politely, and he turned to look at me in surprise. "Ah, Mr. Drake, how wonderful to see you. Are you by chance here to peruse the rest of the fine art my compatriots and I discovered?" he asked with a happy smile. "Can't say I won't in the future, but today I am here for your commission, it's finished," I said with a smile of my own. His face lit up in excitement. "Marvelous. Come, I simply must see what masterpiece you've prepared for me post-haste," he said eagerly, trying to drag me out the gallery. "Now there's an expression I recognize, commissioned some over-the-top piece yet again and learned it's finished?" a deep voice asked humorously. Turning to look, I saw a muscular god with long brown hair and a thick beard walking towards us. "You know me well, Bragi. I commissioned Mr. Drake here to create a life-sized Sphinx statue out of dungeon crystal, and he's just informed me of its completion. Would you care to join me in taking a look?" Ta offered, clearly on good terms with this god. "Drake? As in the creator of the bone statues?" Bragi asked, surprised. "One and the same old friend," Ta said with a nod. "Bragi, god of poetry and the arts. Your works with bone have been quite a popular topic for a while now," Bragi said, holding out a hand with a smile. I shook the hand and was surprised by the strength in the grip. "Alexander Drake, nice to meet you," I said honestly. "Now that we have gotten introductions out of the way, will you be joining me in seeing the work I commissioned?" Ta asked, still friendly but rather impatient. Bragi chuckled, always so filled with energy, old friend? I have no prior appointments to attend, so if you'd have me, I'd love to witness this spectacle," the god said with a smile. "Wonderful. Come, and see," Ta said, leading me eagerly. "Before we get there, I should warn both of you not to try and open the door if you value your fingers," I said seriously on the way. "That's an unusual warning, some sort of reason behind it?" Bragi asked curiously. "The locking mechanism is designed to unlock only when its registered users place their finger in it. If anyone else tries, the door will devour the offending finger. The best part about it is that it's impossible to pick your way in thanks to this," I said with a proud smile. "Such an inventive idea. I imagine it must have taken you quite the amount of valis to commission?" Ta asked curiously. "Not at all, I was the one who created it after all," I said honestly. "Truly a man of many talents, it seems, Mr. Drake. Perhaps I might commission a piece of yours myself should I have want for such a thing," Bragi said, impressed. We idly chatted about my bone figures and what other things I did. They were both surprised to find that I made weapons and armors as well as magic items beyond just the non-magical items like paper I created. Eventually we got to the church and Hestia waved at us as I led the two gods over to my building. "Oh, now there's something you don't see every day. Is this entire building made of bone?" Ta asked in amazement as he ran his finger over the outer walls. "Good eye, I colored and textured the whole thing to look like stone, but you still figured out that it was made of bone," I said, genuinely impressed that he figured it out at a glance. "But that's a god of art for you, I guess." I led the way over to the large metal door and unlocked it with my finger while the two gods watched in interest as the bolts holding it firmly shut all retracted into the door like a vault before the door smoothly swung open. Stunning, simply breathtaking. Look how the light seems to make the whole thing shine like diamond, and yet this detail and precision makes it seem like it will start moving at any moment. You've outdone yourself, Mr. Drake, I could not be happier. Ta said with the eagerness of a child set loose in a candy store with no restrictions. Chapter 73, The Final Step. I'm glad you like it, now we just have to figure out how to get it to your manor. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely not fragile or anything, but it is rather large and heavy. I said honestly. That is simple really, I'll just hire some adventurers to haul it back to my manor. If all goes well it will be in place by sunset. Ta said, unbothered by my concerns. I suppose I shouldn't have expected anything different from him really, as clearly he couldn't care less about shelling out large amounts of money for art. He had quite a lot of money anyways, as his familia was well known and requested for their artistic works that brought in loads of money for them. They were a business type familia and as a result didn't really have any members who delved and fought monsters regularly. After that the two gods left and Ta came back with a team of adventurers hired to move the statue just like he said. I almost felt bad for them really, as the statue was refined dungeon crystal and weighed an easy 18 tons. The group of 20 men were all between level 2 and 3 with high strength builds, and even then they barely managed to load the statue onto the massive cart they brought for it. Ta handed over the other half of the payment for the statue and I told him I'd like a break to recharge before doing another commission like this. It was funny to see his face as he was clearly about to ask for that very thing, but I really was burnt out a bit from this statue. There was something about the sheer scale that I was working with that stressed me out. I knew what it was too, my desire for perfection in what I made. I stressed about missing some small detail or having something out of place because of the size. For some reason I didn't mind imperfection in my cursed tools, but when it came to stuff like my figurines or this statue I didn't want to settle for less than my absolute best. In hindsight that might actually be why they were so popular. All people want perfection in some form, we crave it without knowing in most cases. So when presented with an example that approached that concept, our brains immediately want to impulsively and irrationally possess it. Thanks to this, my figurines that pressed that button were things that you couldn't help but impulsively buy. I from this understanding also figured out why I didn't mind imperfections in my cursed tools. I knew I couldn't obtain it. That was the nature of cursed tools and energy, there was always a downside, a flaw. True perfection was an impossible concept to achieve with the stuff, and I, knowing this, didn't agonize over failing to attain it. It was expected instead, embraced if you will. This related in fact to the thing I wanted to achieve before I updated my fauna again. I wanted to push my limit from 4 properties in an object at full strength to 5. Now that might sound easy, but it very much was not. In truth that was a whole 25% increase, which I felt in my gut was something I needed to hit before I updated. Why I felt this need I have no idea, but my gut hasn't led me wrong since I got to this world, so I was going to fucking listen. This of course led me to sitting in my now empty workshop staring at a goblin-toothed dagger blankly. I've got no fucking clue where to start. I mentally complained, I was stuck. Once I figured out how to make cursed tools, originally the process was pretty instinctual, but now I actually had to figure out how to improve in it rather than just messing with the standard settings. That's all I had really done until now, follow the rules I discovered to achieve a predictable result. I hadn't actually tried to go beyond those rules, and something told me that was the problem here. Even my experiments with spatial cursed tools was done by following the rules I knew but tweaking the technique I was imbuing as well as the restrictions within those rules. Now however it was clear that I needed to go beyond the rules to achieve a consistent increase in properties on all my future projects. I tried to brute force it at first thinking that was the solution, but it became clear that that wasn't the strat when I started hemorrhaging cursed energy, which was quite unpleasant, let me tell you. You ever get like a really bad cut or nosebleed and feel the blood leaving your body? It felt like that, yeah, I immediately shut that shit down real fast. Well, if brute force was off the table, that just left finesse, and I will admit that wasn't exactly my strong suit. I liked my freedom to just do things as I wanted. Probably my less than sound mental thought processes fault for that one, but it was either go a little insane or break entirely on Earth. Sanity didn't really work out all that well thereafter. Everything started to look hopeless. Working till your body was on the verge of collapse just to be able to barely survive, and having no hope of ever retiring tends to break one's will to live. From there the insanity rears its head and you end up eccentric, suicidal, or murderous. I ended up seeking escape in anime and other media, which in turn made me eccentric. Sorry about that, I'm getting off topic here. The point I was making was that I was having trouble with this improvement that was probably actually easy. I tried chaining properties together, but all that ended up doing is fusing them together into a more powerful property with both the effects but the same cost. Obviously this was a great discovery in and of itself, but it wasn't what I was after. To be honest, I probably should have figured that out a lot sooner, but to be fair, I am sort of winging it. The Jujutsu Kaisen manga was not super detailed on the how of things like this so much as the what they did. I was pretty much working off of snippets of incomplete information and crossed fingers to figure shit out. My third attempt at adding 5 properties to a weapon made me want to bang my head on the wall when it worked. Remember when I said it was probably so simple thing I should have easily figured out? I was on the fucking money because my third attempt was to structure the properties in a pentagram mentally. Not because pentagrams have any actual power or anything, but because I was all like, well, what if I put the properties in a geometric shape? And then tried it, and lo and fucking behold, it worked. The answer was so damn simple that I had to actively control myself from lashing out in anger when I figured it out. Chapter 74, Update. Like I'm not stupid or anything, but this was one of those moments when I shouldn't have been trying to complicate the matter but rather simplify it instead. I honestly couldn't be blamed either, as due to my having to reverse engineer literally everything about cursed tool crafting, I was bound to at some point miss a facet that was considered basic like this. As far as I know, I had missed a bunch of them already that if I had known would have made my life a bazillion times easier. To add insult to injury here, I found that 5 properties weren't the limit to this new structured imbuing I figured out, but rather 6 was. Yes, a fucking hexagram was the structure I could use to keep all the properties at standard strength. Oddly, however, a heptagram and octagram didn't work, or my limit would have raised to 8 properties, and that would have pissed me off to no end. For whatever reason, using a structured shape like this only increased my total amount by 50%, which was annoying to discover but within reason. Add on that property fusion thing I discovered in the process of figuring this out, and I could put 3 really powerful properties on something, or 6 normal but more diverse ones. The sheer versatility this allowed me was mind-boggling to even think about. It also dawned on me that I could try putting the technique and restrictions in a structured manner as well to see if it did anything. Spoilers, it did. Until now I had just been throwing the restriction onto whatever I made before adding the technique. It was kinda chaotic. Add in a geometric structure, however, and it went from chaos to order and changed the whole thing. Surprisingly, however, the structure wasn't a 2-dimensional one but rather 3-dimensional. It was like a gem sort of that was formed out of restriction, while the technique was a bright radiance in the core that made the whole thing shine. Like a magic stone. I realized in shock. An outside of plain material containing the extraordinary within it. That was how a magic stone functioned. The material of the magic stones wasn't anything all that special really, yet it holds the essence of the monsters within it, the mana. I had long realized that I could fill an empty magic stone with cursed energy, but now I knew the significance of that fact. Cursed tool creation suddenly made so much more sense, the level of power and how symbolism seemed to play a role. Cursed tools weren't just power slapped onto a thing, but literal manifestations of the restrictions and technique held within it. Low-level cursed tools were simple shapes like caltrops or dice, but complex and powerful tools were people, places, whole worlds, or concepts shaped by and imbued into an object through cursed energy. That was it, the connection between monsters and myself. The reason I was able to absorb the smoke they turned into after I harvested their stones. My technique Hell's Forge metaphorically turned my body into a furnace that used the concepts of the monsters, the smoke, as fuel. That was why I felt the monsters in the dungeon reminded me of cursed spirits. They were very similar in principle. That worried me, however, as if this was true, then didn't that mean that at some point a variant monster would become sapient? If a cursed spirit was allowed to grow without restriction in the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, they eventually developed their own personality and identity, so does this apply to monsters too? Aw, fuck it, this is way above my pay grade. I'll deal with that if it ever comes up, but for now it's time to upgrade. I said with a wide grin as I sought out Hestia. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, Cursed Human. Level 2. Strength 209, G-524, D. Endurance 225, G-658, C. Agility 208, G-515, D. Dexterity 209, G-521, D. Magic 562, D-957, S. Spells, Hell's Forge. Innate technique can use anything from a living being and reshape or refine it per one's will. Incantation, Hell's Forge. Extensions, Hellfire, Cursed Tool Creation. Skills, Heavenly Restriction. In exchange for the ability to wield mana and magic, one gains access to cursed energy and cursed techniques. Blessing of Black, permanently increases cursed energy efficiency, amount, and control. Magic will always start at G rank after leveling up. Vessel of Sin, Hell's Forge Master carries the burden of all mortal sin and is tasked to purify it from the souls of the dead. Strengthen soul over time. Permanent increase to crafting with cursed energy. Permanent decrease to all stats for each innocent soul killed and increase for each sinful soul killed. Grants skill, Soul Gaze. Soul Gaze, see the souls of all things and their sins. Developmental skills, Curse Smith, I.H. Ha, I knew it. I said with a wide grin as I looked over my new status sheet. Your stats went up a bunch, but it's been over a month since your last update, so that makes sense. But how did you raise your developmental skills so fast? Hestia asked curiously. That was the final thing I was working on before I got updated. I had a gut feeling that I needed to raise the amount of properties I could put on an item. I listened to my gut, and I'm willing to bet that it was because I was already getting close to reaching the first checkpoint for the skill to rank up and needed that last little push. I said, happy that my gastric impulse led me right. Congratulations, Alex. Belle cheered, happy for me. We should celebrate at the hostess. I said with a wide smile, and they didn't need any more convincing than that. A while later and we arrived at the hostess and cheerfully found our seats. You all seem rather merry. Did something good happen? Seer asked curiously. Yet I raised my DS from I to H rank and we came to celebrate. It's not a super impressive achievement or anything, but it is an important one because it means I'm making progress. I said with a grin. Congratulations then, but goodness, that is rather fast. She said, genuinely surprised but happy for me. I was thinking a fish special this time, with a mug of spiced mead to wash it down. I said, putting in my order. Everyone else in our group ordered as well, and we just sort of chilled out, casually chatting while we waited. We got our food and dug in with gusto while I savored the contradictory flavors of sweetness and heat from my mead. It paired well with the fish special that had rich flavor from the whole fried fish and mushroom gravy. Chapter 75, Curses and Souls. Once we got done with our meal, we headed back to the church and passed out. In the morning I was jealous of Hestia, who wasn't suffering from a hangover while my head was throbbing. Besides that, however, I was fine and decided to take the day to relax a little. I needed a few days for my body to adapt to my new stats anyways, so it was fine. Eventually my hangover faded and I was left with the pleasant feeling of my cursed energy reserves growing slowly but continuously larger. I wasn't looking forward to my next update, however, as my magic stat was already really fucking close to the first limit of 999s. I was more likely than not going to get leveling sickness again when I broke that limit, which was bound to be just as unpleasant as ever. Kinda jealous of Bell skipping that, as he broke the limit and hit the second one before leveling up all at once. His level up meant his body, dealing with having broke the limit, got rolled up into his vessel being reforged. This meant he was hale and hearty the whole fucking time and didn't get sick at all. Don't get me wrong, the fact I absorbed the concepts of monsters in order to raise my stats was broken as all hell too, but his skill was completely unfair. Gonna sound like a D***CK joke, but at least my soul was bigger than his now. Vessel of Sin came in with that soul strengthening thing it does now after my update, and I can confidently say that it did, in fact, improve my ability to utilize cursed energy. A minor increase, mind you, but an increase nonetheless. If I had to quantify it, I'd say maybe like a 1% increase if I am being entirely honest. It was a humble amount, sure, but eventually that amount will get to a very respectable level. If my calculation were right, in fact, I'd say at about level 4 I'd have a 20-ish% increase in cursed energy efficiency. That is assuming the cost of each increase doesn't go up by a massive amount though, so who knows. Other than that, however, I have no idea what other benefits a stronger soul confers on me, if any. Like in theory there definitely should be more, but as to what exactly those were I have no idea. Souls were a very ill-recorded topic of research in this world, so even when I went looking for information I found only a single mention of the things, and that was in a book on curses, the normal sort I mean. Contrary to the naming scheme, cursed energy was not in fact related to actual curses. An actual curse was merely a sort of negative magic effect that tended to be temporary but could be permanent if you were hit with enough. A rather popular curse was anti-healing, and from the name alone it should be pretty damn obvious why that was so popular. Unfortunately, actual items with cursed effects were illegal as shit, so if you get caught with such a thing it was exile, prison, or death for you. The difference was mostly to do with your level and how dark the curse was. Have something with the aforementioned curse at level 1 or 2 and exile was a pretty high outcome if you didn't hurt anyone with it when you were caught. Have something with agony on it at level 1 or 2 and it's prison or death. Have anything with a curse on it after hitting level 3 and it's an increasing likelihood that you get killed immediately. A particularly fascinating but dangerous curse was the level down curse that forced the person inflicted with it to drop a level temporarily. That curse is instant death, by the way, as it served only a single purpose: adventurer hunting. The thing that was fascinating about that curse, however, was that it directly acted on the fauna, which was a surprisingly rare thing. In fact there was only maybe 4 things ever recorded to do so. The curse, status thief, which was a potion that forcefully revealed one's hidden fauna, a unique magic, and the gods themselves. That was, as you should be able to tell, a very small number considering the 1,000 years that the fauna has been mainstream in use. Admittedly most people wouldn't need to be able to affect a fauna directly like that, but the scarcity of things that did after so long seemed odd. Anyways, as I was saying about souls, the only mention of the things I found that spoke of them directly was in regards to the damnation curse. A more common name for the curse, however, was the God Killer curse. This curse existed in exactly one and only one scenario, a mortal killing a god. The details of this curse, ironically enough, was something the gods went out of their way to make public knowledge. It was very simple really, as if a mortal kills a god, that god inflicts a curse mark on the soul of the mortal, and upon the mortal's death that soul falls into the killed god's hand to be tortured for eternity. This curse was one of the reasons deicide was something only a truly deranged mind would even attempt. The kicker though was that all the other gods can sense this curse, and as a result are usually the reason the mortal dies as they gang up on them with their familiars. That was it on souls. That one tiny thing was all I could find on the subject. It was disappointing to say the least, but nothing I could do about it. Asir/Freya refused to tell me anything about the topic, as it was taboo for a god to share divine information with a mortal. Make no mistake about it, either the nature and knowledge of souls is classified as divine information. Seer did tell me, however, that by the rules anything I myself discovered on the topic was free to be shared with the world so long as it didn't directly threaten the gods themselves. It was some rule about not interfering beyond a certain point in the development of the mortal world. As a mortal, anything I discovered was fine, but the gods weren't allowed to share information beyond the mortal world's current understanding. I understood why this rule was in place too. In heaven the gods were knowledge-wise practically infinite and unlimited. They had access to all the secrets of creation if they chose to spend the effort to look at it. As a result, even though the gods squandered that opportunity, their knowledge on some subjects were vastly beyond mortal understanding, and sharing it would do more harm than good. There was also the fact that the gods enjoyed watching us mortals grow and develop. Chapter 76, Plans and Shield. While I spent the next few days allowing my body to adjust to my new stats, I began experimenting with my recent discoveries. For example, I remade the water ring with this new information, and it was easily twice or more times as powerful as the original. The original 5-gallon limit had rose to 12, and the distance limit changed from a set distance to within sight. The best part was that the cost of the ability was still the same as the original. This made me think that the structured nature of the discovered method had more to do with efficiency than power. Sure, the power went up for the final result, but my gut told me that was actually because the efficiency of my previous products were just that abysmal. That made my eye twitch a bit, but I let it go. Anyways, thanks to this new efficient method of cursed tool crafting, I went back to one of my old designs that I had dropped when I thought it was not feasible, the reflector shield. For those that forgot what that was, I had tried to make a shield that absorbed the energy of attacks before sending all the energy out at once at a time of my choice. The original attempt at this worked, but had such a low threshold for overburdening that I deemed it a failure. My hope was that with this new method I could possibly get the idea to work decently. So long as the shield could withstand a full strength hit from me as I am right now, I'd consider the idea a success. This was no small amount of strength either, as at this exact moment my strength was sitting on the lower end of a middle level 3s. My update had pushed me firmly past the level of a level 2 and into the realm of a level 3 before taking it a step further. By my calculations, I'd be about as strong as a new level 4 when I was finally ready to level up to 3. Such exceptionalism came with a massive downside, however, in that my requirements to level up are now probably as high as a level 3's to hit level 4. It will only get worse the higher I get, unfortunately, but it was a price I was willing to pay for a shot at godhood. Anyways, if I could get a shield to be able to absorb a full strength strike from me, then it meant I could in theory return that exact same amount of power at a target any time I wanted, which would definitely come in handle. I wouldn't need to wait for an opening anymore to counter-attack, I could make one instead. Before any of that though, I had to succeed in creating the thing first. For materials, I was honestly rather spoiled for choice thanks to my metal detector and the drops I had hoarded over the last month. Obviously it was only stuff from floor 1 to 16, so at most level 2 materials, but there was a good selection of monsters I had harvested parts from. In the end I went with some minotaur horns and almiraj hide that had a cross-shaped plate of mithril across the face like a big plus. Naturally, I first refined and shaped the horns into a standard circular buckler that I fused the almiraj hide to the back of as straps and padding. Finally I fused the mithril onto the center of the shield's face. The final result was pretty plain looking, but was a deceptively sturdy shield that would likely even survive without issue under an assault by myself. That wasn't what I was after, however, as I wanted that reflective technique, or the shield would just be a normal shield for me. Don't get me wrong, I was fully intending on adding a shield to my fighting style because I really needed a way to defend against magic or ranged attacks. But I didn't want that shield to just be a tough but otherwise ordinary piece of equipment. I had plans for my eventual loadout that would make me a nightmare to fight against for literally everyone. You want to talk about matchup? Imagine having to fight against someone in a full kit that was purposefully designed to counter every environment, type of attack, and that was next to impossible to damage. That was what I had in mind for my loadout in the future, and the best part was that it was totally possible if I decked myself out in special grade cursed tools. For now though, I needed to work on this shield. For the restriction, I started with the standard issue sort like "this will never be alive" and "this can only be used by Alexander Drake." The rest after that were more technique-specific restrictions that were supposed to make sure the technique I imbued at the end functioned exactly how I said and only how I said, none of that backlash shit. Once this hollow gem cage was formed out of restrictions, I began to pour in the technique I wanted, which filled the hollowness of the cage. With this done, I imbued the cage gem structure into the center of the shield. The shield shuddered for a moment as the curse technique and restrictions settled in its new vessel. The center of the plus swirled and formed a symbol, but that was the only change the shield underwent. So far so good, now to test the limit. I thought calmly as I set the shield down and grabbed my weapon from nearby. I lifted it high and breathed out as I smashed down with my full power. Boom! The sound of the collision reverberated through the air, walls, and floor of the workshop as the shield didn't move at all but developed cracks across its form. It couldn't handle that amount of power but wasn't far from being able to, so perhaps it's possible with some tweaking. Though while examining the shield closely, there were about a dozen hairline cracks on the shield that ruined its structural integrity, but the shape held and was otherwise undamaged, which meant that it had been a fairly close thing. I overwhelmed the technique, which in turn overwhelmed the shield itself, but I didn't do so by so much that it could be considered a complete failure. In fact, quite the opposite really, as in the hands of a normal level 1 or 2 adventurer this technique would be perfect for any normal monster they would likely face. I'll replace the technique from the shield with one made for Lily and shrink it a bit before giving it to her, since she is not as durable as Belle and needs better defenses. I thought as I repaired the damage and removed and replaced the technique with similar restrictions but made for her rather than me. Comment. 8 comment. Vote. Chapter 77, Forge Master's Visage. Thanks to this experiment, I knew that I was still not quite ready to make the shield the way I wanted and moved on to a piece of equipment I had been neglecting but probably shouldn't, headwear. Admittedly, my head was my single most vulnerable place on my body, as it was the only place that I had zero chance of surviving if damaged. Hell, if I used my technique fast enough I could survive having my heart pierced, but brain damage is an instant kill on me. Despite this, I have left my head unprotected until now. There was no excuse or grand reasoning involved this time, I just simply hadn't cared to do anything about it until now. People naturally try and protect their head and vital parts, and I was no different, so I hadn't felt the need to have head protection. I knew that needed to change before I tried going deeper into the dungeon. Unlike pretty much every other adventurer, I was a true solo delver, and that meant I either had to have protection for my head or the sword of perception that couldn't be caught off guard. Having both would be for the best, but I simply knew that there was no way in hell I wanted that sword of perception. Can you even imagine how bad it would suck if you literally couldn't miss any detail of your surrounds ever? Someone farts and you suddenly felt like you had been hit toxic fumes, or you see all the dirt and crusted stuff on everyone's hands. Yeah, no, I would probably want to kill myself with senses like that, and chose to just protect my head with armor instead. For the technique on the piece I wanted something that would make it versatile. My idea was to make something about like Descent's hollow mask from Bleach. The thing covered his entire head without any openings at all, really, save the narrow slit down the middle. I on the other hand want to remove the slit entirely, leaving my entire head completely, leaving a smooth bald surface to work with as a base. I needed a way to breathe, so I just added a standard sharp-toothed hollow mouth and nose. For vision I made the inside of the thing transparent, so even if you couldn't see my eyes I could see just fine. For my hearing I added sharp ears on the sides that had small holes inside of, so the sound reached my ears perfectly without actually exposing them. For aesthetic purposes I had Darth Maul-style horns on top of the otherwise bald top. The final result was intimidating to say the least, even if it was only a proof of concept type prototype that was made of simple refined bone. The solid white of the bone seemed off to me though, so I darkened most of it until it was dark colored, almost black. The only parts I left white were the horns and teeth of the headpiece, giving it a nice contrast that I liked. With the shape and coloration done, I slipped the entire thing over my head and began to make minor tweaks to the shape so it fit me snugly but comfortably. The only annoying part was getting the mouth to open with mine, that I solved by adding a hinge at the side that pushed open the teeth when I lowered my own jaw. Still I was fairly satisfied with the thing as is by the time I was done, as it was almost unnoticeable when I had it on, besides the weight and feel of the material. Now I just need to make a version out of something more durable and turn it into a cursed tool, I thought with a grin. After some debate with myself, I decided to get into my stash of orichalcum that was renowned for being stupidly durable, and adamantite that was one of the best metals for imbuing magical properties into, both of which the dungeon made. I didn't have a lot of the stuff since it was rare beyond rare to find on the floors I frequented, but I still had just enough for a single helm in the style I made. The two metals were also not supposed to alloy together at all, but my cursed technique didn't give a fuck about that and did it anyways. The resulting fusion was stupid durable and great at holding properties. It was also kinda heavy, but that was less important in my opinion. Using my technique some more, I shaped this lump of metal into the exact same shape and size as the prototype I made previously. I also turned the material transparent on the inside, and this just left me with the cursed technique that I wanted to imbue, and I already had the one I wanted chosen. Environmental adaptation, or to explain in detail, the ability to allow me to be unaffected by external environments. This meant I could breathe underwater, in a cloud of poison, or in an environment without oxygen. The best part is that the technique has quite a few restrictions already built into it just by virtue of how it functioned. This meant that with the restrictions I add manually in addition, the technique will last me a long time. Cursed tools with more restrictions also tend to be more powerful as well, so once I imbued this technique on the prototype because I had to test it, I'll know what I'm looking at for the real deal. The answer, it turned out, was a little more restricted than I had thought, but not by so much that it still wasn't a good piece. I had not accounted for the time it would take for the adaptation to the environment to occur, but it was merely 30 seconds, so it wasn't something that would cause me much issues on the real deal. The final touches, of course, were the changes of the metal's coloration to match the prototype more or less, though the shininess remained, which I was fine with. I dubbed the Forge Master's visage, "May you serve me well in the times to come," I said dramatically before laughing at my own antics. With that done, I was pretty much set to go back into the dungeon tomorrow. The look on Lily's face when I handed her the shield I made prior was hysterical. She looked at me like I was insane for just handing such a valuable item over so casually. That was until I told her that I was the one who made it, at which point she looked more amazed at me than anything else. By this point she knew I made statues and figurines and stuff like that, but she hadn't been let in on my actual crafting side of things, mostly 'cause I forgot to. Chapter 78, Sunny Problems. I kept my new helmet/mask in my bag and only put it on when I was already in the dungeon, after the first day wearing it in public led to me almost dying. See, I had it on and was about to make my way to the hostess when Tiona showed up and mistook me for a monster. She broke like 8 ribs with a single drop kick that hit me before I could even react. She felt really bad afterwards, but I didn't blame her too much considering it was rather monstrous looking. That said, I somehow got suckered into training with her for a month after that, when Hestia brought it up when Tiona asked what she could do to make it up to me. Said training was in fact more surviving her onslaught than actually getting taught anything. I mean, it was great for my predictive countering thing I was working on with the Minotaurs, but was brutal in every other way. That woman didn't know the meaning of the words holding back, as I lost count of the amount of times she broke a bone, almost killed me, or sent me over the side of the wall. That last one was my least pleasant experience. We trained for an hour on top of the wall just before sunrise, and the first few times the chick literally kicked me off the wall on accident. She seemed happy that I survived the falls each time and praised me for how tough my body was. Fun fact, by the way, you have to be at least level 3 with high endurance to survive falling at terminal velocity. Something I learned from Tiona after she asked how I pulled it off. I refused to tell her that I was about equal to a new level 3 stat-wise, not that she cared all that much. I will admit that I couldn't really stay mad at her for all the near-fatal injuries or close calls when I knew that she was simply not all that cut out to train others. She was savage, for lack of a better word. Not feral exactly, but she fought like a predator more than a person, and she wasn't very good at controlling her strength as a result. She tried, but if I did something that caught her off guard or got too close to her with an attack, she'd momentarily stop limiting herself, and I was not able to handle that level of power no matter how brief. She was level 6 and my body was barely at level 3, so obviously I broke more bones than I was comfortable with over the next month, but at least I wasn't the only person having a rough time of it in the Familia. I have no clue how he keeps accomplishing it, but Bell had somehow managed to pick a fight with the Apollo Familia. According to him and his teammates Lily and Welf, a red-haired blacksmith, oddly enough, they went to get some dinner after a day's delving and got into a brawl with members of the Apollo Familia. Bell got beaten like a dog by the level 3 captain of the Familia, who held the nickname Phoebus Apollo, and was almost seriously injured had the werewolf of the Loki Familia Bet Loga not called the fight to an end. Unlike the whole thing that happened with the Soma familia, the Apollo familia didn't try to involve me at first. No, they involved the entire Hestia familia when they set the church on fire. It went out fairly fast thankfully, since all the wood was refined and thus didn't burn very well, but I was pissed. I didn't even bother hiding it either, as I found some Apollo members bragging about it in a bar and proceeded to break both their legs and both their arms. The guild fined me heavily for disturbing the peace, and I paid it with a fucking smile on my face. That was where things got particularly suspicious, however, as we got invited to the ball Apollo was hosting. To be more specific, Hestia got invited and she was allowed to bring her captain with her as per protocol. He's probably going to challenge us to a war game, I said casually on the way to the manor of the Apollo familia. And whose fault is that after you went and did such a thing to his child? Hestia said with a nervous look. They started it. Besides, you know how powerful I am, so even if we are outnumbered by so much, I can handle it. The penalties from killing the ones with innocent souls is gonna suck though, I said, unbothered by the almost guaranteed war game. If, and I mean it, if we get challenged to a war game, what conditions do you think I should put forth? She asked seriously. Well, first off, try and make it a siege or duels if you can, though we may need to go to Apollo to accomplish that. Second, we want everything his familia has while he gets exiled from Orario, the manor, and assets we can sell for money since we have the church, but the weapons and treasures are what will really pay dividends. I can use the materials for most of them myself, and we can sell back the rest to the members of the familia afterwards in exchange for favors or even recruitment, I explained calmly. Recruitment? Hestia asked, confused. Perhaps you haven't noticed it, but Belle and I are growing very fast. Problem is, two powerful people does not a powerful familia make. We need numbers if we are to grow to match and one day surpass the likes of Freya and Loki, I said slightly dramatically. Makes sense. Don't know if I trust you not to lead others into being weirdos though, she said while giving me an odd look. Why, I would never. I thought I had done a fabulous job with Belle. He only causes trouble periodically after all, I said, offended. This is literally the second familia he's gotten into a fight within as many months, she pointed out. Bah, that's just statistics. I'm sure he'll not make trouble again for at least a month after this whole thing finishes up, I said, waving it off. That's not reassuring at all, she said, hitting me angrily, but I just grinned. You say that, but I'm having a great time over here. After all, what's life without a little excitement thrown in every now and again? I asked with a wide smile and a laugh. You're insane, she said angrily. Are you just now figuring that out? Tisk tisk, you really should pay more attention, I teased, and she just got angrier. It was a good time. Chapter 79, Balin. We made it to the gate of the Apollo Familia Manor, and the guards there merely glared at us but let us in without a fuss. There were already dozens of gods and captains in the ballroom just chatting and socializing when we walked in. Hestia and I got strange looks from the others gods and captains, since it was public knowledge at this point that we were in conflict with the Apollo Familia. Anyone with half a brainstem could tell that this little get-together was going to get entertaining at some point. We split up, with Hestia heading to the food table and me just loitering out in the open. Belle seems to get you all in the most trouble, first was Soma and now Apollo? At this rate he'll end up annoying the Freya or Loki familias, a male voice with an accent said, and I looked over to see Myaik and Naza approaching in a suit and dress respectively. You know, she said something similar on the way here, but I just don't see what the issue is. So far we could handle everyone he's picked a fight with, and I can't imagine he'll change, so why not enjoy the ride? I said with a smile. Still as mad as ever, I see. A female voice spoke up, and I saw Loki and Finn, her captain, walk up. Sanity's overrated, but I suspect you know that already. Now where are my manners, Alexander Drake? I said with a grin. Findium, and of course my goddess Loki, the small blonde Palom man said with a friendly smile. Tiona's been saying some rather interesting things about you. You don't look like much though, the red-headed tomboy goddess said with a curious look while looking me over. I might not be the most outstanding person, but I promise my performance is anything but, I said with a grin and a wink. Ha! You and me'll get along just fine, boya. I prefer the fairer sex though, she said with a smile. I shrugged. A shame, you are just my type, I said, unbothered by the rejection. How'd someone like you end up with the lowly cow anyways? You don't seem the sort to get along, Loki asked curiously. Oh, I'm not a scoundrel horn dog or anything like that. You just struck me as the sort of woman to enjoy a no-strings-attached turn in the sheets is all. Other than that, I wanted freedom when I went looking for my familia and she offered it. The rest, as they say, is history. I said. Why not apply to our familia then? We offer our members a lot of personal freedom. Finn asked, clearly curious what I'd say. I had thought of it, but you guys are well known for your teams and I didn't think I'd work all that well with others. I was right too, as my magic is very friendly fire prone when fully unleashed. I said, summoning a small black flame above my hand. Some sort of intuition then? It's rare but not unheard of for a non-adventurer to have a feeling about stuff like that. Would also explain what Diona's been saying about how you seem to predict her moves before she does them. He said with a thoughtful look. I didn't feel like correcting him either, as in this case the misunderstanding was in my favor. Loki wandered off at some point and he had to go after her since she apparently caused trouble otherwise. My Ache and Naza had also slipped away while I was talking with Loki and Finn, so I was alone again, though not for long. A dark shadow fell over me and I turned to look behind me only to find Otter staring down at me. Damn son, you's tall as hell. You got some sort of special diet or is this all natural? I asked, unbothered by him looming over me. Natural, you are unusual. He said with a straight face. Oh? How so? I asked, surprised by his answer. Few level 6s are willing to meet my gaze and yet you appear unaffected, it is strange. He said bluntly. You are certainly strong enough to respect, but why would I bow or cower from you when I aim to surpass you, to surpass everyone who came before you? I asked with a grin. That got a reaction, as for the briefest moment his eyes lit up and the corner of his mouth twitched upwards before it was gone, under control. I will wait for the day you can stand as my equal. He said before moving as Freya walked up. Color me pleasantly surprised. I had Otter introduce himself to you, but I had never thought you'd get his approval so easily. Why, I haven't seen him this excited in a very long time, not since Zeus and Hera ruled this city, in fact. She said with a smile. I suppose that makes sense. He seems like the kind that enjoys having rivals and probably got thrilled at the idea of having one again. I said with a shrug. Is that so? She asked the giant man and he nodded with a slightly embarrassed look. Ah, but that reminds me, I have a favor to ask of you. I said casually. She looked surprised. I never thought you of all people would ask for help, especially not for something so little as this. She said, slightly disappointed. Don't go jumping to conclusions. I can handle Apollo easily, but things could get messy if anyone tried to shove themselves into this matter for some reason. I would like you to keep that from happening, that's all. I said, correcting her misunderstanding. Oh, that? You may as well have not asked, since I would have done so regardless. Was that all you wanted? Nothing else, perhaps more personal? She teased. You know I'm not interested, right? I asked with a sigh and she giggled. Oh, I know, but teasing you is just far too much fun. Plus I couldn't help but notice you trying to make a move on Loki of all people, notorious womanizer that she is. Freya said with a smirk. I can't really understand you girly sorts, but tomboys I can understand perfectly, and as a result they appeal to me more. It helps when I know I can't knock them up too. I said honestly while shrugging. The Amazons must be a dream come true for you then. She said teasingly and I shuddered. Nah, way too baby hungry for my taste. I like rolling in the sheets as much as the next guy, but the idea of having children gives me chills, and not the good kind. I said seriously and she laughed. Chapter 80, Balin, 2. We chatted for a bit after that casually, while those paying attention to me looked like I had suddenly grown 3 more heads and wings. It wasn't hard to figure out why either, as I was talking to Freya like we were equals and Otter hadn't ripped my head off yet. His devotion to her was a well-known thing, so the fact he seemed totally chill with me casually talking and laughing with Freya was making people question if I was real, and if so, how in the fuck I pulled it off. My answer? Get good fuckers. Nah, it was just because I was likely the only person who was aware that she daylighted as a waitress and didn't give a shit. Everyone else who knew more likely than not treated her respectfully or kept their distance from her alter persona. Me though, I knew the chick Asir first and Freya second, and we were friends more or less. As for Otter, I was fairly certain he had been aware of this casual friendship for a while now, and may even been told by Freya to pay it no mind, which he did because he's just that devoted. The dude's the sort of guy that would see the world literally burning down, and if Freya said to ignore it he would act like nothing was happening. He was the sort of pious that Christians had wet dreams about, absolute devotion to his goddess. Hype for Otter aside, I was at this point being listed as an anomaly by nearly everyone here, and that A-OK in my book. People tended to avoid stuff that they couldn't understand. There were exceptions to this rule of course, but majority-wise this held firm, at least in my experience. Soon enough it came time to dance, and I decisively said absolutely not and moved away from the dance floor. Freya also went to go socialize with the rest of the gods and their children while I found a nice wall and stayed there while keeping an eye on Hestia. After a few songs played and some people got a few dances in the room dimmed and a spotlight, no idea how they pulled it off to be honest, landed on a curly-haired god with a very punchable face and fine golden and orange silk clothes. Welcome one and all to my regularly held Helios Ball. Tonight we have an especially exciting announcement. Apollo challenge Hestia to a war game on grounds of her captain attacking one of my children and cruelly crippling them. He said while dramatically pointing at something that the spotlight swiveled to reveal. It was of course the dude who broke the arms and legs of wrapped in bandages while using crutches to walk with a single leg in a cast. The guy was loudly moaning about the pain and just all around playing the victim act. Ha 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 ha. I burst into laughter at the guy's appearance, which seemed to piss off Apollo, who clearly didn't enjoy his show being upstaged. Who is that? Who dares to laugh at the suffering of my child? The god roared. Tap, tap, tap tap. The sound of my feet across the floor echoed in the silence of the room as I walked out of the dim light and into the spotlight with a wide grin. The guy acting injured paled at the sight of me as I approached. My oh my, I recall breaking both of your arms and legs and yet you only need one cast? And you have your head and chest wrapped in bandages as well? I'll give you a chance to walk away like you are obviously able to and end this farce on your own, or I'll turn it into a reality. I said with a predatory smile. You would dare threaten my child in my presence? In front of so many gods? Apollo screamed in outrage, but I ignored him to stare down the adventurer. Fuck. You lunatic. The guy yelled fearfully as he retreated in fear when it became clear that I was not bluffing. See, was that so hard? Now then, I believe we shouldn't play around with pointless falsities, don't you agree, God Apollo? I asked with a smile while the god in question had a hideous expression but held his tongue, since even he seemed aware that if he said anything it would only play into my favor. Not going to answer? No matter. If I heard you correct, you challenged us to a war game. I can accept on behalf of my goddess, however there is a condition attached to this acceptance. I said casually as I walked over to a nearby snack table and plucked up a bit of skewered cheese. Well, what is it, mortal? Apollo asked, still clearly angry but at least pleased to see me walking into his trap. That's some good cheese. Why are you looking at me like that? Oh right, the condition. Well, we will only agree if the game is a siege set in a week from now, with you as the defender of course. I said, savoring the cheese as it really was quite good, sharp with a slight peppery note. Done. You won't back out now, will you, dearest Hestia? The sun god questioned as a spotlight landed on her. She shook her head and gave him a smug look. You're going to lose, Apollo, just wait. She said confidently. URG. How are we supposed to win against so many people? Later when we returned to the church she was not so confident. Chill, you think I wanted a siege just because it will be a cool tale if we pull it off? I have a plan. I said reassuringly. Well, what is it? Sabotage? Infiltration? Assassination? She demanded while trying to guess. All good guesses but wrong. I'm going to walk right up to the front door and march straight to their captain. I said with a nod at my own genius. This is no time for jokes, Alex. Hestia screamed angrily. First, I'm not joking, and second, you can seriously relax, we have this in the bag, I promise. And I never break a promise. I said seriously enough that she actually paused to stare at me. That wasn't a lie? You never break a promise, really? She asked as if that was such a shocking thing. I nodded. Nothing short of being physically unable to complete a promise has ever stopped me before. It's never been that bad, but you get the idea. This is one of the reasons I don't make promises lightly. I said honestly. Fine, but if you break that promise I'm giving you to Hephaestus. The small goddess threatened, but let the matter rest. All the more reason not to fail then, I rather value my freedom at the moment. I joked.
Thanks for listening.